All right, so today we're going deep, deep into abstract objects.
Abstract object.
You know, these things, we talk about them all the time.
We do.
But we don't really
think about it.
realize how bizarre they are when you stop and think.
Right.
So things like, numbers,
Yeah.
sets, even things like democracy or the rules of chess.
Exactly.
You sent me some stuff from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on this.
Oh, yeah.
This is going to get
Really interesting.
wild. So we got to figure out what makes something an abstract object.
Right.
And then why do philosophers care so much about this?
Yeah, they get really worked up about this stuff.
They get really worked up about it.
And for good reason. It's like, it's fascinating because on the one hand, it's so intuitive, right?
Right.
We all have this sense of what's abstract and what's concrete.
We do.
Like, I don't think anyone's going to say that the number 7 takes up physical space.
Right.
But then the minute you try to actually define what makes something abstract,
Yeah.
it all falls apart.
It's like you think you got it, but it's like smoke.
Exactly.
Just slips through your fingers.
Yeah, how do you pin it down?
How do philosophers even begin to try to deal with this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they usually start
That's
with what
fair.
they call paradigm cases.
Okay.
So these are sort of the easy ones, the obvious ones,
Yeah.
like, okay, the number 7,
Yeah.
Maybe the Pythagorean theorem,
Right.
which is just a truth about triangles, right? But it exists whether or not any triangles actually physically exist in the world.
Right, right. So pineless truths about
exactly.
picture.
Yeah, and they exist. I guess you could say they're timeless, whether or not we ever draw a triangle.
Right.
So
All right. So those are the easy ones.
those are the ones where everyone's like, yep, okay, I'll grant you that those are abstract.
Okay.
But then
So the Stanford Encyclopedia entry talks about
Yeah.
all these different ways of trying to define abstractness.
right, because you can't just point to the examples.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
it's like I don't know, like trying to explain to someone what red is
Right.
by just pointing to a fire truck and a stop sign.
Right.
Yeah,
you get the general idea, but you haven't really
but you haven't actually explained
defined it.
what redness is.
Yeah. It's like a vibe.
It's a vibe rather than
Yeah.
you kind of get it, but you haven't actually defined the concept.
All right. So what about connecting abstract with other philosophical terms?
Right.
Like, I think the entry called this the way of conflation,
Right.
where they kind of try to...
So philosophers will sometimes try to kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know, to
Cheat.
well, not cheat, but like
Yeah.
to sort of say, well, isn't abstract just another word for universal?
Yeah.
Oh,
So they try to... So the idea there is that all abstract objects are universals.
right.
And vice versa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like redness or roundness.
Right.
But the problem is that it doesn't quite
Yeah.
work out that neatly.
Right. Yeah, because I can imagine redness actually being in an object.
Right.
Like the redness is actually in this apple. Does that make it less abstract then?
Right. Or like triangularity, right? Like, is
Yeah.
that really?
Yeah. Is the game of chess a universal?
Like, exactly.
I don't know if I'd call that a universal.
Yeah, like
game.
I don't think you can say that like all abstract objects are universals.
Right.
And vice versa.
All right. So that's another dead end.
Yeah.
What about focusing on our minds?
Oh, right.
I think they call this the way of abstraction in the
Yeah. The way of abstraction.
Stanford Encyclopedia. Yeah.
Where it's like, okay.
So this is the idea that like abstraction is a mental process.
Okay.
So like, when you see a bunch of different dogs
Right.
and then you form the concept dog,
Right.
you're abstracting away from the particular differences
Right.
and focusing on
Yeah.
the commonalities.
So then abstract objects would be
Right.
sort of these mental constructs.
Well, that's the traditional way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
But it runs into some problems,
Yeah.
for one thing.
Right.
I mean, that kind of relies on an old view of how the mind works.
Right. Right.
And even if it's true that our minds construct these abstract objects,
yeah.
does that mean that they don't exist independently of our minds?
It's kind of like saying, well, I dreamt of a unicorn last night.
Exactly.
Therefore, unicorns exist.
Exactly. It doesn't quite follow, does it?
Not really a sound argument.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about then?
Well, there's a kind of a more
Modern version of this.
Okay.
Which is called the way of abstraction principles.
Abstraction principles.
Yeah.
All right.
It's sounding promising.
It is. It's actually, I think, in some ways the most promising.
Yeah. Okay, so what are abstraction principles?
So think about it this way. It's like we were talking about how, like, the direction of a line is an abstract object.
Right.
You can define that using a principle. So you can say, like,
Okay.
line A has the same direction as line B, if and only if they're parallel.
Okay, so the abstract concept of direction comes from the very concrete relationship of parallel.
Exactly. And so the idea is that a lot of our abstract concepts arise out of these kinds of relations between concrete things.
Okay.
So you start with the concrete, and then you
abstract away.
You abstract away. But can all abstract objects be defined this way?
That's a great question. I think that's one of the limitations of this view, because it seems to work really well for things like mathematical concepts. But then if you try to apply it to, like, I don't know, like moral values or fictional worlds.
Yeah, justice.
Yeah, exactly. It gets a lot harder.
It's like, what's the equivalence relation that gives rise to justice?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
I don't think there is a good answer to that.
Yeah.
So it's limited.
All right, so we hit a couple more dead ends here.
Yeah, but philosophers, they're persistent.
They are.
They don't give up easily. So they've got other tricks up their sleeve.
What else?
Well, sometimes it's easier to define something by saying what it's not.
Oh, okay.
And this is what they call the way of negation.
The way of negation. So instead of saying what it is, you say what it lacks.
You list out the features that it doesn't have.
Okay, so what kind of features are we talking about here?
Well, the classic one is non-spatiality. So abstract objects, like numbers, don't seem to have a location in space.
Yeah, you can't point to where the number 7 is.
Exactly.
Like, I can't visit the number 7.
Right, you can't go there.
On vacation.
Right, it's not like a place.
Yeah.
And similarly, a lot of abstract objects don't seem to exist within time either.
Yeah.
Like, when did the Pythagorean theorem come into being?
Yeah, right.
It seems like it's always been true.
It does, right? It's kind of
so they're not spatial and they're not temporal.
Yeah.
But then, again.
Yeah, what about, like, games?
Yeah, exactly.
Chess was invented at a certain place and time?
Yeah, that's right. So there are definitely some tricky cases there.
Yeah, where the non-spatiality thing kind of gets a little fuzzy.
Yeah, they have a historical origin.
Yeah.
Which makes them a little bit more concrete in some way.
Right, okay, so even defining them by what they're not is a little bit slippery.
It is.
Are there any other negations they use?
There are, yeah. So another big one is causal inefficacy.
Okay.
So the idea here is that concrete objects, like rocks or brains, can cause things to happen in the world.
Right.
But abstract objects don't seem to have that power.
Yeah.
Like, my thoughts about the number 7 can cause me to write it down.
Right.
But the number 7 itself didn't cause my hand to move.
Right.
So there's a kind of a, they don't have this causal power.
Yeah.
But then even here, we run into some tricky cases.
Yeah.
I mean, what about fictional stories or legal laws?
Right.
They're considered abstract objects, but they can have a real impact on people's actions.
They can.
And beliefs, right?
Totally.
Like a powerful novel.
Yeah.
Can really inspire social change.
For sure.
So it's like, it's a good rule of thumb, but it's not a hard and fast.
Yeah. It's not like a perfect definition.
Yeah.
Are there any other negations?
There are, yeah. I mean, philosophers have also explored whether abstract objects can be duplicated.
Okay.
Or, like, discerned from one another.
Okay.
So, like, can you have 2 distinct instances of the number 7?
Okay. Yeah.
That most people would say no.
Right.
But then there are these things called immanent universals.
Immanent universals?
Yeah.
That sounds intimidating.
Well, they kind of are, but the idea is that, imagine the color red.
Okay.
Now, some philosophers think that redness itself exists in every red object.
So it's not like redness as a separate thing.
It's not like over there.
It's like distributed among all red things?
It's in all the red things.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of redness in this apple, and there's a little bit of redness in that fire truck.
Okay.
And so on.
So it's not that it's abstract and separate.
Right.
It's actually kind of like physically in the objects themselves.
Right. It's in there.
Okay. And that really kind of messes with the distinction.
Because if a universal like redness can be in concrete objects, is it still abstract?
Right.
It's a good question.
It seems like every time we get close,
I know,
this distinction just like
slips away.
Slips away.
It's like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
It's like a greased pig.
Yeah.
You just can't
You just can't grab it.
catch it.
Yeah.
So are we just wandering in this philosophical wilderness forever?
Well, not necessarily. Some philosophers have proposed that maybe the problem isn't with the definition of abstract, but with our notion of existence. So maybe...
All right, so we got to rethink what it means.
Exactly. And exist. Because we tend to think that existence is this all or nothing thing.
Right. It either exists like this chair, or it doesn't exist at all.
Exactly. Like it either exists in the same way that this table exists, or it doesn't exist at all.
Right.
But maybe there's a kind of middle ground. Maybe there are degrees of existence.
Oh, so maybe a chair has strong existence and like a number has weak existence or something like that.
That's the thought.
I mean, I don't know what that means, but
I know.
We're going to have to figure that out.
It's a very strange idea, but it's a really interesting one, I think.
Okay, so this idea of like weakening existence when it comes to abstract objects.
Yeah.
I mean, we are really in the deep end of the philosophical swimming pool here.
We are in deep water.
Yeah.
And there are some really strange and fascinating creatures down here.
Yeah.
So
okay, when we talk about weakening existence,
I'm
trying to even wrap my head around, like, what does that mean?
I know. I mean, it's
like
your concept.
Okay, this chair, it has strong existence. And maybe the number 7 has weak existence. But what? I mean, what does that even mean?
Yeah. How do we even make sense of that?
Yeah.
Well, one of the philosophers who really thought a lot about this was Rudolf Carnap.
Okay. And now I'm familiar with Carnap from verificationism.
Right.
But...
Okay, what did he say about?
So Carnap's view was basically that questions about whether abstract objects really exist, like in some absolute sense, are kind of meaningless unless we specify.
Okay, hold on.
Meaningless? Well, meaningless in a specific sense.
Okay.
So what he meant was that, like...
So he's not saying that abstract objects are just meaningless.
No.
There's a specific...
Or if you ask, like, do numbers exist?
Yeah.
Without specifying what linguistic framework you're operating in.
So it's kind of like saying, is this move legal?
Right, exactly.
Without saying what game you're playing.
It's like, you
got to tell me if it's chess or checkers.
You have to say what the rules of the game are.
And so Carnap's thought was that you can only talk about existence within a particular...
The rules of the game.
Yeah, like a framework, like a linguistic framework.
Yeah.
So like within the framework of mathematics, numbers exist.
Right.
Within the framework of fiction.
Okay.
Unicorns exist.
Right. But that doesn't mean that unicorns exist.
Right.
Out there in the world.
In the same way that, this table exists.
Okay, so it's not about some objective truth about the universe.
Right.
It's about
the rules.
The rules of the game.
Yeah, of the linguistic framework.
Okay.
That we've adopted.
Okay.
So he called these like internal existence questions.
Okay.
And contrasted those with external existence questions.
Okay.
So like an internal existence question would be...
Internal to the game.
Yeah. Like, do knights exist in chess?
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
But then an external existence question would be like, well...
Does chess exist? Yeah. Or like,
yeah.
Is chess real?
Right. Or is this table real?
Right. And for Carnap...
Which is a whole other...
Those questions are kind of meaningless because they presuppose that there's some like neutral standpoint from which to judge.
So then this whole debate between the Platonists and the nominalists just becomes irrelevant.
It's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
It's not about whether they're right or wrong.
Right.
It's just about what game you're playing.
Yeah, which framework is most useful.
Okay, so I can see how that would be appealing.
It is.
But are there other ways to weaken existence without going full Carnap?
There are, yeah. One...
Without saying that it's just all language games.
Right. One really interesting approach is what's called meta-ontological minimalism.
Okay, meta-ontological minimalism.
Yeah.
All right, that sounds... So the idea here...
Like my kind of philosophy.
Well, you might like this.
All right, so
the idea here...
Write this down for me.
Okay, so the thought is that our concept of an object is actually very flexible.
Okay.
It can accommodate things whose existence makes very few demands on the world.
What does it mean to make demands on the world?
Okay, so think about a chair.
Okay, this chair.
Yeah.
It has to be...
It's making a lot of demands on me right now. I'm sitting on it.
Yeah. Well, and it has to be made of particular materials.
Yeah.
It has to be located in space and time.
It can't just be a figment of my imagination.
Exactly. It can't just be like a hallucination. It has to like really be there. Yeah. It has to interact causally with other objects.
Yeah.
So it makes all these demands on the world.
Okay.
But the minimalist says, look,
yeah,
abstract objects don't need all that baggage.
Okay.
You know, they can exist in a way that's very
lightweight.
Yeah, lightweight, thin.
Right. They don't have to make all those demands.
So they're kind of like ghosts.
Well, that's
not really there.
It's a good analogy in some ways.
Okay. Okay, so how do they exist then?
So the way they put it is often that abstract objects exist in virtue of modal truths.
Modal truths.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to need a concrete example here because
let's do it.
What is a modal truth?
Okay, so a modal truth is a truth about what's possible or necessary.
Okay.
So like it's possible that I could have had cereal for breakfast this morning.
Right.
But it's not possible that I could be a triangle.
Right. Right.
So those are claims about possibility.
So how can a number be grounded in possibility?
Take the number 7.
Okay.
The minimalist might say the number 7 exists.
Yeah.
In virtue of the fact that it's possible to have a sequence of 7 objects. Oh. So it doesn't depend on any actual collection of 7 things.
Oh, right.
But just on the...
Like the universe could be empty.
The possibility.
But I could still imagine 7 things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just the pure possibility of it.
Okay, so it exists because we can imagine it.
What? In a sense.
It's not just that we can imagine it, but that it's...
Possible.
Possible.
It could be the case.
Okay, all right. I'm starting to wrap my head around this.
Yeah, it's
pretty out there.
It's a strange idea, but
I kind of like it.
But it's a powerful one.
It kind of fits with the fact that they seem to have this eternal, unchanging quality.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they exist outside of space and time.
Yeah, so that intuition actually fits really nicely with the idea that they're grounded in necessary truths.
Okay.
Because if something's necessarily true, it's true in all possible worlds across all of time.
So minimalists would be pretty happy with that result.
Yeah, they would say, this is...
That's what's going on.
This is capturing what's special about abstract object.
Okay, I mean, I'm assuming no philosophical theory comes without...
Of course not, right?
It's
Philosophers love to argue.
Critics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some of the objections to minimalism?
Yeah, what are some of the problems?
Well, one common objection is that it can feel kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah.
To say that the existence of like a mathematical object is grounded in something as
solvency.
Yeah, flimsy or like, ephemeral as a modal truth.
It's like saying the Eiffel Tower exists because it's possible.
Yeah, exactly.
To build a tall structure out of metal.
That doesn't quite cut it, does it?
It doesn't quite capture the concreteness of the actual Eiffel Tower. Yeah. So it's like, okay, it explains how they exist.
Right.
But it doesn't explain...
But it doesn't really tell us what they are.
Yeah, like what they are.
Yeah, their essence.
Right.
Their nature.
Yeah, like, okay, I know the recipe for a cake, but that doesn't tell me what it tastes like.
You gotta taste it.
I gotta bite into it.
Yeah.
Okay.
To know.
Yeah. So that's a pretty big problem.
It is.
And that leads to, I think...
And it leads to another
problem.
Big question.
Okay.
Which is, well, if abstract objects exist in this kind of thin or minimal way.
Okay.
How do we interact with them?
Yeah.
How do we have knowledge about them?
Right. If they're not causally interacting with us, how are we even aware of them?
This is where things get really, really tricky.
Yeah.
And this actually goes back to a famous philosophical dilemma posed by Paul Benacerraf back in 1973.
Okay.
He basically argued that if abstract objects can't affect us causally, then we can't have knowledge about them.
Okay.
But if they can affect us causally, then they're not really abstract.
Right.
So it's like this
catch-22.
Yeah, like a catch-22. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
So either they're completely isolated from us, or they're not as abstract as we thought.
Exactly.
Oh man.
So this has led some philosophers to propose alternative ways of thinking about our epistemic access to abstract objects.
Okay, so how do we...
So, like, how do we...
get at them?
How do we know about them?
Yeah.
Some have suggested that we have a special kind of perception.
Okay.
A kind of mathematical intuition.
Like a sixth sense.
Yeah, like a sixth sense.
For numbers.
For abstract objects that allows us to grasp them directly.
Okay.
Others have argued that our knowledge of abstract objects is grounded in our knowledge of concrete ones.
Okay.
So, for example, like our understanding of numbers might stem from our experience with counting.
Physical objects?
Yeah, like physical objects.
Okay.
So it's not that they're totally disconnected.
So there's a bridge.
There's a bridge
between the two. Yeah.
Okay.
And these approaches are trying to kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah.
Without sacrificing the unique features of each category.
Okay. So we went from paradigm cases to abstraction principles to weakened existence. And now we're talking about. How do we even know about these things?
Yes. How do we know?
It's a deep, deep hole. A deep rabbit hole.
Yeah.
We've gone down.
All right. Well, that's a good place to stop for now.
Yeah.
And we'll pick it up.
Pick it up next time.
Okay. So last time we ended on this cliffhanger.
A cliffhanger.
Where some philosophers just reject the whole abstract concrete distinction.
The whole thing, yeah.
Like they just throw up their hands and say, forget it. This is all.
It's a mess.
It's hopeless.
I mean, that's a pretty radical.
He's a radical view.
But so what's the reasoning?
Well, I mean, there are a couple different flavors of this radical view.
Okay.
One is just to say, look, abstract objects just don't exist.
Okay, so this is like
the nominalists. Yeah.
Like if you can't touch it, it's not real.
Right. They're like, everything is ultimately concrete.
Everything is concrete. Yeah. So no numbers.
Well, I mean, they have to.
Yes.
They have to come up with some story about how to explain.
Yeah, like how do they explain numbers then?
Right. So some of them will try to rephrase our language.
Okay.
And say, like, look, when we talk about, 7 is a prime number, what we're really talking about is some fact about
concrete groupings of
concrete groupings of objects.
Okay, so instead of saying 7 is a prime number, I say all groupings of 7 apples share a certain property.
Exactly.
That seems really convoluted. It is very convoluted.
But I guess they're committed to it.
Yeah. I mean, it gets really complicated.
Yeah.
When you try to translate everything into concrete terms.
Yeah.
But, some nominalists think it's worth it.
They think it's worth the effort.
Yeah. And then some nominalists take a more pragmatic approach.
Okay.
They say, look, talk about abstract objects is useful.
Okay.
But not because it refers to anything real.
Okay.
It's just a convenient fiction.
Okay, so it's like a tool in our conceptual toolbox.
Yeah, it's a tool.
Yeah.
It helps us make predictions.
Yeah.
Organize our thoughts.
Okay, so abstract objects are like...
Yeah, like the average person.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, the average person doesn't actually exist.
No one is.
The
average person, it's a statistical construct.
Yeah, right. So for them, abstract objects are just sort of...
Yeah, like convenient fictions that help us.
Okay, I see how the nominalists, wriggle out of this whole thing.
Yeah, they try to.
What about the even more radical?
Right, the even more radical ones.
Yeah,
the ones who reject not just abstract objects, but
all objects.
All objects.
Yeah, concrete or abstract.
Okay, so are they suggesting that we're living in a simulation?
Not quite a simulation, but they do think that our whole concept of an object is kind of flawed.
Okay.
So they might say that, the world isn't actually divided up into these neat little...
Like discrete?
Yeah, discrete.
Little units.
Right. It's more like a continuous flow of experience.
Okay.
And our language kind of cuts it up into these arbitrary chunks.
So instead of seeing a world of objects, they see like this...
Yeah, like a web, interconnected web of relations.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I guess that's...
It's a very different way of looking at things.
It is a different way.
It's like those optical illusions where you can see a vase or two faces.
Exactly.
And it just depends on...
Yeah, how you're looking at it.
Yeah, so maybe reality is kind of like that.
Maybe.
And we're just imposing. Yeah, we're just imposing these
categories on it. So yeah, I mean, so we started
some full circle.
We started with
this idea that
we've got these paradigm cases.
Yeah.
We kind of know what abstract objects are.
And now we're questioning.
And now we're like,
the whole.
Do we even know
what we're talking about?
The whole distinction.
Yeah.
All right, so what are we supposed to do with all this?
Well, I think, the main takeaway is that these are really hard questions.
That's questions.
And there are brilliant people on all sides of these debates.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers.
No easy answer. But the fact that we can even have these conversations, that we can even think about these things, I think it
is pretty amazing.
Is a testament to the power of the human mind.
It really is. I feel like I've just like dipped my toes into this.
It's a vast ocean.
Vast ocean of philosophy.
And we've just skimmed the surface.
And I don't even have my floaties on. I'm just like...
You're in the deep end.
Treading water.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of philosophy.
I think so, yeah.
It's not about finding all the answers. Right.
It's about asking the right question.
The right question.
And keeping the conversation going.
All right.
So to our listener, we say,
keep pondering.
Yeah. Keep thinking.
Keep questioning.
Keep exploring.
And we'll see you next time.
Until next time.